I'm not hearing anything. Welcome into the Paul Kuharsky podcast. I'm Paul Kuharsky at paulkuharsky.com. Pleased to be with you on this Thursday afternoon from Edley's Barbecue in East Nashville. 5 Points. Great location here. Place you should stop by and eat. And if this is not the one for you, there is one in your neighborhood. Trust me. You can go to Sylvan Park, Donaldson, Franklin and Berry Farms, Franklin and the Factory, Gallatin, 12 South and Nolansville. And here's what you got to do. You got to go in, got to cross your fingers and hope they have the fried ribs. If they have the fried ribs, you must order the fried ribs. Otherwise, you get the burnt ends, get a pork plate, brisket plate. All the sides are delicious. Food's phenomenal. Trust me. Edley's Barbecue, the finest in and all around Nashville. Also brought to you by ZENSPORTS, the place to bet. I will talk to you about them later. Pleased to have Mike Herndon scheduled to join me shortly. Part of his column at paulkuharsky.com set off maybe the biggest conversation point of the week so far, because a question about it from Easton Freeze about the Titans maybe being soft got a big reaction out of Brian Callahan Wednesday at his press conference. So we'll talk about that and many other things with Mike Herndon. We're going to talk about the decision to go with Mason Rudolph ahead of Will Levis for the rest of the season, provided he stays healthy, and answer all of your questions. Congratulations to Sam Phelan at A to Z Sports. Came up just a little bit short in Survivor. Second place, so I believe he won $100,000 ahead of outside of $1 million. But great run, played a great game, and the Titans press room had a 14-episode season inside of the 18 game NFL season. Disappointing that he didn't win, but it was a lot of fun for us in the press room during a really bad Titans season. It kept a lot of things entertaining for us, so that was phenomenal, and we really appreciated him keeping things interesting. Next year is going to go back to boring White Sox talk, and that'll be disappointing. But maybe he'll get on there again for Survivor 50. Who knows? Maybe he finished too high for that. I'm not quite sure. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, down the road, like, rate, and review. If you're here with me on YouTube or Twitter, retweet, give a thumbs up, subscribe, do all those fancy things that help. You need to be a member of paulkuharsky.com where you could read Mike Herndon's piece. Blake Bedingfield has been delving deeply into Will Levis, to Amy Adams Strunk's management style, and to things like that. You need to read his game previews and game reviews as things have gone along. 3 more games left in this season. Winnable games, I dare say. Indianapolis, not very good. Jaguars, 11 points would have beat them in the first game when the Titans only managed to score 6. Houston, the Titans have already beaten. It's hard to imagine a sweep, but their playoff fate may be sealed when that finale comes around on January 4th or 5th. Good to see so many of you in here. Jabari, CW, Josh, Dwayne, number 1, all the rest of you. Mike Herndon is here. So with little ado, we'll bring him in the room. Happy to have him. Mike Herndon writes weekly at paulkuharsky.com, for which I am grateful and for which you should be a subscriber. How you doing, Mike?
Doing good. How about you?
Good to see you. How'd the Christmas, was it a Christmas performance for your little guy?
It was just like a Christmas party in their classroom, so they were filling them up with sugar, and but there's someone else's problem to deal with the sugar high for a bunch of 4-year-olds right now.
Well, so. I hope you got some too. You got to get your sugar as well. Let me read the line that you wrote or the paragraph that you wrote that kind of set this whole thing off. You wrote, "There's a certain softness to this team that hasn't been there in recent years. While players absolutely bear some responsibility there, it is often said that a team takes on the personality of its head coach. And while I'm not saying Callahan is soft necessarily, he's certainly shown some fire on the sidelines at times this season. I do think his team's culture permits that softness to exist in ways that it wasn't allowed to under Vrabel's leadership. I'll also concede that Vrabel was perhaps sometimes too far on the other side of that spectrum, which can be a problem in its own right. Easton Freeze kind of just posed the broad question to Callahan about whether his team was soft. We know that's a hot button word for any football team. Were you surprised the degree of Callahan's reaction? I found it maybe a little performative.
Yeah, I thought I kind of was not surprised, I guess I would say. Of course, anyone that has their team called soft, yeah, that is kind of like touching the third rail, kind of for any football organization, because it's a sport built around toughness. But I think he mentioned he come into the locker room and call these guys soft to their face. I'm not saying that these guys are soft relative to normal humans, right? But that's not ultimately who they're judged against. They're judged against their competitors on a NFL football field. And I think this team is, we've heard Peter Skoronski talk about them not being able to handle adversity. When something goes bad, they slump their shoulders and it's kind of a here we go again. That's a soft mentality. I'm sorry, but it is. Jarvis Brownlee and Jarvis Brownlee, I don't know if he was speaking for himself, but it sounded like he was speaking for other players as well, that he thought they kind of let the cold get to them on a 42-degree day at noon in Washington, D.C., in November. That's a soft mentality. I don't care if you're from South Florida and not used to the cold. You can't he's never played in a cold environment before, right? I mean, it's football. This is part of it. You play outside in the cold during the winter. So I just think that there's too many of those little things that have popped up in comments throughout the season from various players for me not to have alarms going off. And especially when I see the play on the field reflect it, that when something does go wrong, I don't see a lot of, fire from these guys that, hey, we're going to get back in this game. We're going to make this right. We're going to, they kind of lay down. And the second half performances all season long have been a disaster. I mean, they've led in a lot of these games at the half, only to kind of let it go in the second half. And I think that's tough teams don't do that, right? Like if you can hang with them in the first half, why can't you hang with them in the second half? And it's either they can't adjust with the scheme like the other coaches are, or they're not able to hold up over four quarters and hold the rope when the going gets tough, because it's a sport that's built to be competitive and built to be for parity, and too often they're just not competitive in the second half of these games, which I think is a problem.
Yeah, I agree with that for the most part overall. And I do think some of that fire, when they show it, is misplaced. I mean, they were down 10 in dire straits late in their most recent game, and Jeff Simmons forced an incomplete pass and celebrated like something had really gone on and he was going to have contagious fire, and he moved 10 or 12 yards upfield when he should be getting back in the huddle to give the opponent the opportunity to snap the ball faster than you'd like, instead of kind of giving them time to helping them burn the clock, so to speak. Now, a lot of fans are like, no, they think that emotional showing, that level of celebration, shows that he cares and shows that he's got passion. I like his passion. I like that he plays hard, but having passion and playing hard to me doesn't equate to a 12 or 15 second celebration of making the play he absolutely should make, and that he should get back in the huddle and make again. And so I think some of that stuff is also kind of misguided, and he's supposed to be a chief leader there, and I don't know that he's bottling it or unbottling it the way necessarily that he should. Now, I'll be accused of nitpicking on that and picking on Jeff there, but I don't think they have a handle necessarily on how to do this stuff.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think even when you see Callahan's kind of fire come out, it's mostly been directed at the referees, right? I mean, a lot of times it's been, him yelling. And look, some of those calls, I was right there with him, right? I understand his frustration and why he's doing that. But it also, when that's what gets you going and gets you fired up, I mean, you're placing blame externally on the referees, right? You're not firing up your guys. You're not turning to the sidelines and saying, all right, that call went against us, but what are we going to do about it? What do we do next? That's what matters. It's looking backwards and looking outside instead of looking inward. And I think sometimes that stuff, sometimes it's justified. Your team wants to see you have their back when they feel like they've been wronged. But I think other times it's sending the wrong signal of, oh, we got hosed on this, and woe is us, kind of a pity party kind of deal, and you just can't afford that. And I get it; some of the calls have been atrocious, but that every NFL football team gets atrocious calls against them at some point during the year. It's the state of officiating in this league, unfortunately. But I don't know. There's just some of this stuff that it started to get under my skin throughout the season, and it's continued to be there. And every time it starts to pop up, it just gets more and more irritating to me when I see it.
The other side of this is physical toughness. Now, I think they have plenty of physically tough guys. I wouldn't call them a physically soft team, broadly speaking. But Nicholas Petit-Frere is not a tough guy. And we have talked to him about that to his face. We haven't gone up to him and said, hey, Nick, you're soft. But we've talked to him about his problems with the physical elements of his job, which his failures at, quite frankly, have got him benched repeatedly. And the only reason he's out there is because he's they fail to have sufficient alternatives for him. So there's at least one key spot where they're insufficiently physical.
For sure. And I think, and I've kind of said this throughout the year, and I think the good news in this whole thing is I think there's some guys that are on this team that eventually could ascend into leadership roles that do kind of bring that element. I think J.C. Latham's play absolutely shows a physical and mental toughness. And to me, he's got the personality, the play, everything to eventually be a good leader for this football team. But right now, I feel like the leaders are few and far between. I know Jeffrey Simmons, holds himself out as a leader. I think there's elements that he does a good job with from a leadership standpoint, but there's other things where I think he does grab too much for excuses and that kind of thing, rather than accepting responsibility and leading that way. But outside of him, I mean, who do you even point to? I know they give Kenneth Murray some responsibility from a leadership standpoint, but I don't know. I don't feel like there's strong player leadership on this team. And I think Latham is the guy that you hope ascends into that role, but it's tough to lead as a rookie. And especially as a rookie offensive lineman, coming in at 21 years old. That's a tough spot to be in, to be asked to lead an entire unit of veteran players. So it'll be interesting.
You had guys like Diggs who would have been there and got hurt, or Woozy who would have grown in that role, but he was absent for a long time. And it's an awful lot of first-year guys, no matter how much veteran experience they had. Let's go to the big theme of your column this week, and it's interesting. Our friend and your good friend, Zach Lyons, completely opposite of you on this.
Yeah.
But you, because of how their people and their decisions have unfolded, have lost faith in this regime to choose the next quarterback. And obviously there's going to be another quarterback here next year based on the benching of Will Levis now. So you tweeted pretty harshly during the game that you'd lost faith. The column, you took a little bit of a breath and stepped back a touch, but you don't like for Rand Carthon to be in charge of personnel and to be deciding on who's replacing Will Levis now.
Yeah, to me, and this is as much a Callahan thing as it is a Carthon thing for me, because I think indisputably this team has gotten worse since last season. They the stats kind of all bear that out. I mean, they're right
Maybe
now
over the course of the season.
Yes, yeah. They're minus 125 in point differential this year. They were minus 62 through the end of the season last year. That number is likely to get worse rather than better. They're going to finish with, at best, if they went on a 3-game winning streak, which I just don't see on the cards here, they would finish with the same record. They're likely going to finish with a worse record. They are worse in DVOA. They're worse in virtually every advanced metric. And crucially, they're getting blown out far more often. And they've lost 7 games by 10 plus this year. They lost 8 games by 10 plus in the last 2 years of Rabel combined, those 2 bad years that got him fired. And there's a good chance they end up losing as many or more this year by 10 plus than they lost in the last 2 years combined. So it's gone in the wrong direction, despite them spending $200 million in guaranteed salary, not total salary, guaranteed salaries this past year, which was the highest in the NFL. They had a 7th round pick, a 7th overall pick. They had a 38th overall pick added to the roster, and they went backwards. And I understand Derrick Henry left, but Tony Pollard has been the bright spot of their acquisitions. Tony Pollard has not been the problem. If you would have gotten more out of Derrick Henry, it would have been marginal improvement over what Tony Pollard has brought to the table in the run game, because all of the passing elements would still be a mess. So, obviously Henry brings less to the pass game than Pollard does. So I think it's gotten worse despite their best efforts to make it better. And again, I think, people would say, well, this is a long-term rebuild. They knew they were rebuilding. No, they didn't. They don't go out and spend that kind of money on Calvin Ridley, a 29-year-old receiver, if this is a long-term rebuild. They don't go out and trade for L'Jarius Sneed, who's 27 years old and has a knee issue that they knew about ahead of the trade. If this is a long-term rebuild, those are not long-term pieces. Those are short-term, we want to get better and contend for a playoff spot pieces. And maybe they overestimated Will Levis. Certainly that's in play. But the fact of the matter is they spent a lot of money. They tried to get better. They got worse. And I think given that, I have a hard time saying – Callahan, I have a great feeling about long-term. And if you're going to give Carthon, I think Carthon was a huge part of bringing in Callahan. So to me, now they're tied. And if you're going to get rid of Callahan after 1 year, are you going to give Carthon another head coaching hire and another quarterback draft pick? Because he drafted Levis. And whether we want to assign him the responsibility for Levis or Vrabel or Amy Adams-Strunk or whoever else we want to pin that on. I think ultimately he's the one that turned in the draft card, right? And we can't, pick and choose what he gets credit for and what he doesn't when his name is on the line as the general manager. So I just, to me, if you're going to make a move, you make it now before you go commit yourself to some quarterback that fits Callahan's system and Callahan's eye for what he wants this offense to be. Because when you commit to that quarterback, whether it be a veteran like, Sam Darnold, or if they wanted to try to go after Brock Purdy or whoever that may be, it's most likely going to be a 3-year commitment financially. And if you go draft a guy, you're in the first round, you're committing to that guy for 2-3 years at least. So you're going to set the course of this operation this offseason for the next 2 to 3 years at the most important spot on the roster. And if you don't have complete faith in the guys that are making those choices, I just think maybe now's the time to reconsider if you're going to reconsider this Carthon-Callahan marriage. Yeah,
it's interesting because the indications I'm getting are that she is going to stay the course. But we know that she could be, a bad loss to Houston and Oilers uniforms away from changing her mind on something like that, because she can be swayed by a big result. If you're to look at veteran quarterbacks who are free, well, Darnold's the only one that's free. Mm-hmm. But there are some that could come free. Matt Stafford, Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins, Justin Fields are all guys that could come free. I don't know what they'd cost. trade-wise. But if you're looking at those guys, who do you get excited about? Okay, and let's play the card that Callahan's the coach. Obviously, he's got experience with Carr and Stafford, right?
Yeah, he does. He has experience with both of those guys. I would be excited about Stafford. He's older. I think that there's some injury concerns with him. He tends to get banged up a little bit at this point in his career. But I still think he's playing high-level football when he's out there. And I would get somewhat excited about him as a short-term Band-Aid. Obviously he's not a long-term solution. Neither is Derek Carr, who I think is 34. Or Kirk Cousins, who's 35. I mean, these are all older, or Cousins may be older than that, actually. But these are all older guys that would be short-term, get-me-over solutions to kind of show proof of concept that, yes, Callahan can win if given a good quarterback. And then we got to go find the next guy here pretty quick on the heels of that. It could even be a Falcons type of situation where you go get somebody and then draft somebody to try to stay ahead of it at that point. But Stafford would be by far the most exciting of the veteran options to me. And then after that, I think Darnold, I have some hesitation there just because of the how little success in the grand scheme of his career he's had. It's really been in a perfect situation with Minnesota with a great offensive head coach and great offensive pieces around him that he's really excelled. He did have a pretty good stint in Carolina that was obviously less of a great situation. So I'm intrigued by him. The tools are all there. You would be excited about the skill set. And then I think the other one would be Brock Purdy. I like Brock Purdy. I have since he started really kind of playing for the Niners. I understand this year has not been great there overall, but I still kind of like Purdy. I think he brings a lot of what Levis did not, and maybe this is me overreacting to the Levis failure, but he brings all the stuff that Levis does not do: the pocket presence, the feel, the understanding of what a defense is trying to do to you, and being able to anticipate and know the way to beat that. I think he brings all that at a high level. And I think you can work with that, even if the physical skill set won't wow you.
Where's San Francisco going if they move Purdy?
I don't know. That's what I'm curious about. I know Cousins has long been like the apple of Kyle Shanahan's eye for some reason, and maybe that goes back to some time. I think they spent some time together early in their career in Washington. I could see maybe
some exciting rotation of quarterbacks.
It would be interesting. I would imagine they'd be trying to trade Purdy for a pretty high investment pick wise, and then go grab Cousins for cheap and kind of continue to be able to build a strong roster around a cheap quarterback. I would imagine that'd be the route. But yeah, I could see maybe that being a fit. But that would be an interesting spin of the wheel there.
All right, so we presume Sanders and Ward are the top two quarterbacks, and let's presume for the time being the Titans are not in range for those guys, and they don't have the capital to go get in range, and teams that are in range are going to take them anyway. Yeah. So who's the third and fourth guy in this draft, and is there a case to be made that they're worth taking? I mean, is Jalen Milroe in that category, and is he not too raw as a passer to stake your franchise on?
He'd for sure be my third. Now, I don't know. I don't think Milroe really fits what Callahan wants in a quarterback necessarily. So this may be mostly my own personal taste in quarterback play. I think what Milroe brings to the table from a physical standpoint, he's a physical player, physical runner, durable body, all that stuff. You want a quarterback that can stay healthy. Milroe has been able to stay healthy for sure. But what he brings as a runner and then as a deep ball thrower, I think are good traits. And he's got the arm strength, all that stuff. I think really Milroe does need some refinement, and it would probably be good if he could sit for a year, at least a partial year, behind somebody, and then maybe be worked in after that. But Milroe for sure would be my next one in that group, assuming Sanders and Ward are off the board there. And then after that, I was at least intrigued by Drew Aller, but it sounds he's going back to Penn State. part of me is interested in Dylan Gabriel, although I think his physical stature is kind of, it's again, he's a guy like maybe Purdy, who smaller, not the biggest arm, doesn't have the tool set, but he just makes plays and he just wins football games because that guy, and maybe this is just my personal experience, but he destroyed Texas last year in that Red River shootout. And, he's obviously had great success at Oregon this year. He's a guy that's played a ton of football. I think I've come around to the Bill Parcells model of, I think experience matters a lot if you're trying to play a quarterback right away. And Dylan Gabriel has a ton of experience. So he'd be a guy I'd be a little bit intrigued by, although, he's not really generated any draft buzz whatsoever, despite putting up monster numbers everywhere he's been, basically.
Yeah, that'd be curious. What do you think? The defense got a lot of hype coming in, Titans, and Denard Wilson got a lot of hype coming in. They can't rush the passer. They don't take the ball away. They've been put in bad position a lot by turnovers and by special teams. You find anything special about this defense outside of the fact that it survived some cornerback injuries and covered reasonably well considering that and no pass rush?
Yeah, I think it's not surprising considering Denard Wilson's background, but I think the secondary certainly has been by far the most impressive coaching job really on this entire roster this season. What they've gotten out of Darrell Baker and Jarvis Brownlee and even guys like Mike Brown and Darryl Worley. These are guys that are plucking off the street and getting good play from, which is, something I think Vrabel and his staff were able to do at the defensive line position, especially. But they've been able to do it in the secondary, which has been really good. But yeah, the pass rush is the Achilles heel here. They have no pass rush. Arden Keyes actually played pretty decently, really, over the last 8 or 9 weeks now. But Harold Landry's disappeared. They have nobody behind those two. Jalen Harrell, he's played a lot of snaps. And can you remember him making one play this year?
No. I was having this talk with Zach just in text because he gave him a hit in what he wrote at Stacking the Inbox. I said, well, it's not a hit as a seventh rounder just because he's on the field because they don't have somebody else. Right. And he was talking about my expectations of a seventh rounder. I said, well, I expect everybody who's on the field to potentially make a play here and there, and Jalen Harrell has not. So he's just a guy who's put on the field ahead of two guys they cut in Murphy and Weaver, who also didn't make plays.
Yeah, and same for Ali Gay too. Neither one of those guys. I can't remember them making a single, pressure or a single.
Gay had one. Gay had one stack, I think. Where
that's right.
Gay.
Yeah. Oh, he's out there. Yeah, but you don't even notice him most games, and that's a major problem for them. When you can't generate a pass rush, and you're kind of duct taping it together on the back end because of injuries, it's just a bad mixture. And I also think they're getting awful inside linebacker play at this point. I think Kenneth Murray, after briefly entertaining the idea that maybe I was wrong about him earlier in the season, I think, it is what we saw in LA with him. He's a liability in coverage. He gets fooled too often. And then the guys that they've been cycling next to him ever since they traded Ernest Jones have been a disaster. So
Ernest Jones is great. Ernest Jones is playing really great out there, but they're not going to pay Ernest Jones what Ernest Jones probably gets on the market. So you have to hope that James Williams or Cedric Gray pans out. I don't know if they stick with Murray at 7.5 or whatever it is. Do you think Landry's done? I wrote earlier 2 weeks ago, I said, I thought they needed an edge to go opposite Landry. Now I think they probably need an edge to replace Landry because you can't pay Landry 17.5 cash next year if this is who he is now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and his numbers or his salary for next year is fully non-guaranteed, so they can get out of all that. So I would say I'd guess he's probably gone. This is probably the end of the road for him, just because you can't have this kind of production drop off this late in your career with no guaranteed money left on a pretty big contract. I think that's just a formula for, a cut.
In that case, I mean, you really have to think long and hard about first round edge, depending on what's there. But I mean, they have deprioritized that position to an extraordinary degree. I think fringe Titans fans don't realize that Derek Morgan and Javon Curse are the only 2 first-round edges in the history of the Titans as the Titans.
And that position is historically a position where you have to spend top 50 picks in the draft to get big-time production. If you want a star edge rusher, that's where you find them. And there's a number of guys who have hit at that position outside of the top 50 picks in the draft is extremely small. I mean, you're talking about, like a Max Crosby and, Daniil Hunter. Those are like the 2 guys who have hit in the past 20 years outside of the top 50 picks in the draft, because it's a position that relies on, you have to have the length, the speed, the strength. It has to be the full package. And there's only so many of those guys walking planet Earth that can do that while bending and doing everything else at a high level. And frankly, this draft is a good draft to go get an edge rusher pretty high. I mean, James Pierce, obviously the guy from Penn State, I'm blanking on his name now. It'll come to me at some point. But really good edge rusher from Penn State, who's actually my favorite guy in this edge class. And then Nick Scorton from Texas A&M, if you want kind of a bigger body. There's a lot of really good players in that position group that'll be available towards the top of this draft that I think would be good picks. But you got to go find your quarterback as a veteran then, and you got to go find a veteran right tackle too. So they've got a lot of holes to fill for sure, and it's going to be interesting how creative they get to do it.
I know you've got something at 12:30. Can you stay with us close to then?
Yes, yeah, and Abdul Carter, yeah.
Abdul Carter. Can load up questions for Mike, and we'll go what direction you want to go if you want to hit us in the questions here. Outside of Colt Anderson, do you have the feeling that there's somebody that's failing on this coaching staff that needs to be part of a change? I'm wondering about Nick Holtz, because I was saying yesterday on Robbie and Rex Road, they need to tighten up the offensive operation, right? There are a couple too many delay of games. Play calling comes in late sometimes. They don't run a very good hurry-up offense, and Holtz has kind of explained why on that. It seems unreasonable to me that you can't just do it. And the role an offensive coordinator would play as a non-play calling offensive coordinator would be to, excuse the pun, tighten up those operations to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I do agree. And look, I mean, that was probably the weakest hire to me on the coaching staff to begin with. He had very little experience above like an assistant level, like in not even a position coach level, like a assistant position coach level before this jump to offensive coordinator from Jacksonville's passing game coordinator the previous year, which again was only a 1-year stint there. So to me, that was the weakest hire coming in. And if they are looking for someone to cut, then maybe, would make sense to kind of give them an opportunity to make a big improvement on the kind of offensive brain trust. I think it would be Holtz. I mean, we know the relationship there and all that. But it feels like he was a guy that was brought in as almost a comfort blanket. And I know the piece on The Athletic from I'm blanking on the author's name now, but last week about the
I need to go back and read that. I missed it.
Paul Daner, I think it was who it was. Yeah. The relationship between Callahan and Zach Taylor, and how Callahan was kind of his right hand and the guy that just he could lean on for anything at any time. I feel like he wanted Holtz to be that guy just because of the comfortability there, but he also still got to be a good football coach. And I don't know that there's sufficient evidence that Holtz is that.
I think too, he could use an elderly presence there. I think maybe he's counting on his dad to be that, but his dad's probably got his hands full with his own thing and can't also be his consigliere, if you will. Or hasn't been for whatever reason. James Pirtle asks us, do we think there'd be a backlash if the Titans go Falcons route, big name free agent and early draft quarterback? I'd say it's investing too much capital in the position given all the other things they have to address. Like, I don't think you can spend big capital on somebody that's going to sit on the bench for conceivably 2 years.
It would be hard to, and financially at some point, you run out of money too, because they've got a decent amount of cap space. They could probably get creative to squeeze some things in. But if you're going to go get a veteran quarterback, especially one like say Stafford, who even at his older age is going to command, north of $40 million probably per year. And then you've got to go sign, if you're going to go this route and you want to consider drafting a quarterback in the first round, you got to go find an edge rusher like we just talked about. You got to go find a starting right tackle. Those guys are not cheap. So at some point you run out of resources to make to square all of the holes in this roster. And they don't have to have a perfect roster. I'm not saying that, but I think there would be backlash in the fact of, if you don't have that right tackle on the roster already, by the time you draft that quarterback, people will say, well, great, we went and signed a quarterback and drafted a quarterback, and now he's going to be on his back every play because, here we go with the right tackle problem again.
Mike Herndon, our guest from PaulKuharsky.com, University of Texas fan, feeling good about what's going to unfold in the next couple of weeks?
Semi-confident. I'll be honest. Ewer scares me week to week because you never know what you're going to get with him. But if he comes out and plays his C-level game, I think they take Clemson pretty easily.
Ed asks, considering their rebuild timeline and Simmons' age, do they consider moving him for assets? I think, they didn't this year when he was playing poorly, which was good because he's played a lot better since that consideration period. But until they have some other true star, he's as close to a star as they have. And I think they got to have somebody. I think they overemphasize him as like face of the franchise star, and he's not. But clearly they feel like they have to do that with somebody. And if it's not him, who?
Yeah, I would be interested to know what they could get. But I don't think it's a bad idea. If you could get a first-round pick plus for him, I don't think it's a bad thought to look at that as a kind of accelerator for a reset here.
I did not think they could get that, but then in talking to some people, I think he's viewed as more valuable than I thought. But I was also investigating that when, during those first 6 weeks when he was not close to the best version of Jeff Simmons, and he's been a lot closer to that since that bye week when he's played much better. Seems unfair, Jason says, to clean house after a single year, but are all options on the table if they lose the next three, considering who they're playing? Indications are that Amy Adams-Strunk is going to be patient going forward, and there is a case to be made for continuity. There have been coaches who have started poorly who have turned into Hall of Fame coaches. You go ahead and give your reason why this is not Detroit, which started their current regime with an equally bad record.
Yeah, and in my case against the Dan Campbell comparison, because I got thrown that a lot when I kind of came out with this take. But it's, he finished, I think it was 3-13 his first year, but he started it's 3-13-1. He started 0-8 before the bye, and then had a tie, had two close competitive losses, and then went 3-3 down the stretch. So there was clear progress happening throughout the season. If you break it into, basically thirds, terrible start, still kind of bad in the middle, but then at the end they were pretty respectable and beat a couple of good teams, by the way, 2 playoff teams in those 3 wins down the stretch. So I saw clear progress, and then you go to year 2 and he goes 9-8, and then you go to year 3 and then they jump into the 12-5 or whatever they were last year, and now they're arguably the best team in the NFL. Barring the injury issue that they've now hit. But I think you saw clear progress. I have not seen that from this team. And if anything, they've moved backwards here late in the season. And I think that's a concerning piece of this.
Yeah, I think we saw progress with the 2 losses to the Chargers in Minnesota, 10-point losses, but there was something going on there, and then the upset in Houston. But it turns out those were outliers, right? Levis had a ridiculous yards per attempt in those 3 games, and that's the best thing Levis can offer. Then they go to Washington and just get destroyed in 20 minutes. Then they score 6 points against the Jaguars, and then they fall to pieces against the Bengals. And that more than undoes any good that they've done. Now they could conceivably, best case scenario, finish with 3 good games, but it would be against 3 bad teams. It would be with Mason Rudolph. There's no reason for us to envision it coming. And, what's your expectation for these last 3? I'll let you go on that.
I'll say 1 and 2. I think they probably beat either Indy or Jacksonville. Like you said, maybe Houston's sitting everybody by week 18. But I think they probably split either Houston or Jacksonville and then lose to, or they split between Indy and Jacksonville, and then they lose to Houston.
And they wind up drafting 9th to 12th.
Yeah, they'd probably they'd be somewhere in the back part of the top 10, I think, if they go 1 and 2, most likely. If they go 2 and 1, yeah, they may be outside of the top 10 altogether, which would be, to me, a problem.
Yeah, and it's not just about that first round pick too, but it's about being lower every time through. But at least you hurt Kansas City by not giving up as high a pick for L'Jarius Sneed. That would be the one positive. Mike Herndon writes at paulkuharsky.com every Wednesday. One of the best things we have going on. I'm proud to have him there, and I hope it goes on and on and on, because he's got a busy life down there with successful business and a tyke who keeps him busy. Merry Christmas to you and your family, Mike. I appreciate you very much. Thanks for jumping on with us and inadvertently stirring things up here for all to get interested.
It would.
Things interested.
A spicy Christmas. Yeah. Merry Christmas to you. And thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Take care. Mike Herndon, everybody. Read him on Wednesdays. We'll finish up here with just some questions and maybe a few items that I had going on. Let me hit on those few things. Point differential is something that Mike mentioned here, and I've got a little bit on that. So the Titans currently are negative 125. That puts them on pace for negative 152 point differential. That is worse than the Munchak Locker team in 2012, which was minus 141. Better than Wisenhunt Locker in 2014, which was minus 184. So that'll be the second worst of the Titans era in point differential. ZENSPORTS is primary sponsor of this podcast. No danger first wager bonus. If you lose your first bet, you get refunded up to $1,000 if you bet something that's plus 500 or lower. Simply go to ZENSPORTS, get their app, sign up using the code TNPAUL, that's TNPAUL, and you're set for this no danger first wager. If you bet $10 or more, you get a free 1-year subscription to paulkuharsky.com. It's an $81 value, and we're immediately going to give you winners. I would take Miami -1 hosting San Francisco. 49ers are a mess. They're so banged up, and cross-country trip, I just don't see things going well for them. Miami playing better, still in contention. JT Runke, who is helping me out as always as a great producer here and has been pretty consistently giving you winners, though he's hit a little bit more of a slump, has Washington +3.5 hosting Philadelphia. That's an interesting NFC East game. JT, Washington +3.5 hosting Philadelphia. Please check out ZENSPORTS, great loyal sponsor of mine. Gambling problem, call 1-800-889-9789. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 and over and in Tennessee to bet. Check them out. I am of the opinion that the Titans will be less explosive with Mason Rudolph at quarterback than they have been with Will Levis, though their overall numbers this season don't bear that out. Will Levis, 6.75 yards per attempt. Mason Rudolph, just behind him at 6.59 yards per attempt. Better versions of Levis, though, that number goes all the way up into the nines. Mason Rudolph does not get up there. I asked Nick Holtz about giving up the potential to be more explosive by sitting Will Levis. Here's what he said today.
I wouldn't say that. Against Detroit, he had a couple big ones down the field. So kind of the offense is all still open. All the stuff are still there. So whether it's off play action or drop back, Mason still, he can push it down there. And we feel confident with both of them doing that.
I expect to see more dinking and dunking. Maybe he'll push it down the field. He gets the ball out quickly. He's going to take fewer sacks. He still throws interceptions, not at the rate that Levis does. But in this last game against the Bengals, you saw when he came in, he was taking checkdowns that were available to him because of the state of the game. And the one time he tried to push it, he got picked. So I don't know. I don't think there's much to be gained here. I don't think there's anything to be gained by Mason Rudolph. Maybe they enhance their chances to win a game or two. But the season commitment was to learn everything they needed to learn about Will Levis. And maybe the body of evidence is in, though Brian Callahan declined to say that. I think 3 more games of Will Levis would have been better for this team to get. On the other side of the ball, I asked Denard Wilson, Denard Wilson took a question about Anthony Richardson. The Titans have hardly seen Anthony Richardson. They've seen more of his backup the last 2 years, including Joe Flacco earlier this season. So here's Denard Wilson on the concept of Anthony Richardson.
Actually, his potential to run the ball. He's good running the ball. He's a big, powerful man. He looks like a DN out there, and then he can throw the ball a country mile. He has a strong arm. Their play action pass game is a pretty good play action pass game. So we got to stay over the top, but we have to populate the line of scrimmage with guys to stop the run.
Populate the line of scrimmage, which is what they always try to do to stop the run. Haven't stopped the run as well as they want to. And even when they haven't had the success off of that you would like. Josh says, Mason is going to play himself into a second contract somehow. Well, I think for Mason Rudolph to be here next year, he would have to be part of a 3-quarterback mix. I mean, I think Levis is here next year. It's under cheap contract the next 2 years. Unless they really do a big quarterback revamp that we talked about earlier, where they're drafting one and signing one. It'd be hard for me to envision them getting rid of Levis. I think, if so, they trade him to somebody that'd be willing to have him as a third, or try him as a backup who would mostly be sitting, kind of like Zach Wilson's doing in Denver this year, and see if they couldn't get him up to speed. Some more comparisons here to the Lions. The growing pains the Lions went through in 2021 with 3 wins coming in December and January definitely helped build the culture that Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell wanted with the franchise. So what happens now with the Titans if somehow they win these 3 games, which seems inconceivable, but it's not inconceivable. What's the Titans' identity? Jay wants to know, and that's a great question. When they play as they're capable of playing, they run the football, they throw some play action, and they play good defense, which is the exact same identity they had under the coach they fired when they had Derrick Henry. And were a team that everybody wanted to have a more modernized offense, which is what Brian Callahan is supposed to bring and hasn't been able to put on the field. Now we're down to judging how much of that was, Will Levis's fault as opposed to Brian Callahan's. S. Rob says, I just don't see, if you clean house, how is this an attractive job at all? How many GMs and head coaches has Amy fired in the past decade? Well, Robinson had what, 6 or 7 years, and Vrabel had 6 years. Those are long terms. Those are beyond the average life expectancy of a head coach or a general manager. So she will have done fast turns on Carthon and certainly Callahan if she were to make moves. And certainly it wouldn't be a job at the head of the list for the hottest young prospects. But it is one of 32. So there will be takers. I agree. You make it less attractive. If she fires Brian Callahan, the next hot young coordinator is going to think, well, I follow his shoes and he got fired in no time. So there's a danger to me coming and staking my career on going there and getting fired super quickly. But another line of thinking is I can get that job and it's going to pay me well, and I'm assured of 4 years of salary, and there are worse directions my career could go, and I'm a commodity right now, and who knows if I will be one in another year. So, it's not as if it'll be a blank. I agree it will be less attractive if it's available. We need to stay sucky for a while so when that quarterback does come in the draft, we have a high enough pick. Well, Alex, the pick next year is Arch Manning. I mean, you want to get in the Manning family if you can. And that's going to be the number one pick, I feel quite sure. And they're not going to be bad enough to have the number one pick next year, I don't think. They're not in range of the number one pick this year, and I would expect them to be better next year. And you're not going to be able to trade into that pick because the team up there is going to take Arch Manning, or if it doesn't, it's going to get a motherload for it. So if the Titans are fortunate enough, if they're in a position where they still need a quarterback next year, and they wanted to trade for Arch Manning, they would have to trade the ranch for Arch Manning, which wouldn't be a bad move. I mean, if you're sure as you can't miss guy and you want in the Manning family, that's not a bad route to go. But it's a long time off, and you got to make moves to get your team in order now. So I don't know how you just kind of forestall everything and wait to be bad again next year to be in range to trade up to Arch Manning and then have a quarterback needy team wind up with the number one pick to take Arch Manning. It's just too risky. If Callahan gets smashed by the Colts, I think the narrative evolves. Well, I mean, everything's always evolving. But I don't think one game is going to determine his fate. Yeah, this is a popular opinion. David D. says Vrabes being let go was shocking from my perspective as a fan of another team. And I think most of the league felt that way. I mean, I think this is wrong. CW is telling David that he's very rarely wrong. He's not perfect. But this Callahan gives me serious Adam Gase flashbacks. He looks lost, and then he lashes out because he got triggered. Well, I don't know if I call it lashing out. He raised his voice and he cursed a couple times. It wasn't a freak out. He's raised his voice a couple times on a couple topics. And Adam Gase was completely uncomfortable and weird in front of the camera. Brian Callahan is not uncomfortable or weird in front of the camera. Of all the things that Brian Callahan is not good at, dealing with the media is not one of them. He's a very forthright, intelligent speaker as the Titans representative in front of the media. Adam Gase, from what I saw from afar, was not that at all. So I wouldn't say that. Do I think Rand might give Trey Lance a shot since he knows his background? I don't know. Anything's at play, but you know, the Cowboys are down to a little rising playing in the background. Cowboys have had him in-house for a while, and they haven't given him a look. And he was a mess in the preseason. So I doubt it. Daryl says if the Titans suck in 2025 for Arch Manning, then it would be a new GM and coach who would get Manning, which is true. Just one final thought before we go. John Robinson interviewed for the Jets job. John Robinson's a good dude, and John Robinson got off to a very good start with the Titans. I don't know how he convinces a team to hire him as general manager, given how he ended with the Titans those last 3 drafts. He's really going to sell that COVID threw him off his game, but that takes care of 2020. But I don't know what it means for 2021 and 2022. I haven't read what's been written in New York about his candidacy, but he's going to answer a hell of a lot of questions about Caleb Farley and about A.J. Brown and about Traylon Burks and about Isaiah Wilson. That's a lot to answer for as an incoming guy. Ed Henry wants to know if I'll go see the Bob Dylan movie. I'm curious about the Bob Dylan movie, but I don't go out to the movies. They stream pretty quickly. So I'll watch it when it comes out. Much more interested in the Springsteen movie that's being filmed right now about the Nebraska era with the dude from the Netflix series about the Chicago beef restaurant. Forgetting the name of that. Great to see you all. Subscribe to paulkuharsky.com. Eat at Edley's. Bet at ZENSPORTS. Don't block the box, and be sure to lock the locks. I'll see you from the press box in Indianapolis after Titans Colts. Be sure to join me for a podcast then. Take care, everybody, and be well. Cheers.